Hi, this is Mindy Lighthype, and today I want to talk to you about light on form. And basically, what I mean by light on form is how to get something to look three-dimensional on the paper. And today I'm going to demonstrate that by just doing a simple egg. And I'm going to work with the light source that is standard in scientific illustration. So the first thing I'm going to do is just go through what I'm going to be using in this demonstration. I'm going to be using a B pencil, an HB, a 2H, a plastic eraser, my kneaded eraser, some repositionable artist tape, and some small pieces of tracing vellum, and a piece of drawing paper. All right, so what I'm going to do now, the first thing I want to do is I'm going to be drawing the egg, and I start out with a soft pencil. So I'm going to use the B pencil first. And one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to be using my wrist to create a nice smooth drawing of the egg. And what happens for me is that my wrist has a natural tendency to want to curve towards my body. All right, going away from my body is uncomfortable. So what I'm going to do is I'll start at the top of the egg, and very lightly I'm going to sketch until my wrist becomes uncomfortable. That's about as far as my wrist will go. So I'm going to turn the page and continue to sketch and turn again. And turn again until I get back to the top of the egg. Okay, so here is my egg shape. Now the reason why I've done this very lightly with a B pencil is that I'm now going to take my 2H pencil and with a little bit more pressure in one continuous line, so rather than sketching back and forth, I'm going to try to very lightly go over this pencil line, turn it when I need to, turn it again. So what I'm doing is I'm drawing right over the B pencil line. Now you really can't see any difference there, except that now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my kneaded eraser and I'm going to get rid of that dark line that I made that was a much heavier and fuzzier line because I went over it so many different times. And when I erase it, it may be hard to see. I'm going to zoom in. But I now have an egg shape that is one continuous line, and it's much lighter, so that when I go to do this in colored pencil, watercolor, gouache, or any other mediums, I have a very nice light line and not a lot of sketching and mess. And I think that this is a good way, if you're going to draw right on your paper, to work. So again, I started with the B pencil, I lightly sketched, then I drew my 2H on top, and used my kneaded eraser to erase so that I would have one continuous faint line. What I'm going to do now is I want to show you the difference between something that would look flat and something that would look three-dimensional by introducing you to what I call an armature drawing. The armature drawing is going to act as a topographical map opposed to a city-street map. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing I've done here is I prepared this. I've traced over my egg, and what I did was I just sort of thought, okay, well here's the top of the egg, here's the bottom of the egg, and this is the width. So if you look at this, this would be north, south, west, and east. And so what ends up happening is if I just follow these lines straight down and straight across, this would look more or less like a city street map where, you know, if you were in New York City and you were trying to figure out how to go uptown, you know, this would be the avenues and these would be the streets. And, you know, you basically would look at it and it's a grid system. But it doesn't look three-dimensional at all. It doesn't show you where the hills and valleys are. And so this is really what a flat street map would look like. But now what I've done is I've taken the same principle and I've got my north, south, and my west, east. And I've come down, and if the egg were sitting on a flat surface on a table, it would not be sitting right at this point. It actually would be sitting right in the bottom of the egg. And so as I bring the surface contour down, I've actually come up and I go to this point, come down, this goes up to here. I mimic the same on both sides, and then bringing this. And now all of a sudden, this drawing, if we compare the two of them side by side, this one definitely has a very flat feeling, and this one is beginning to look like it's three-dimensional. And I think that that's very important that you start to understand what surface contour is all about, because the surface contour is going to show you how your light will hit the surface, as well as show you how the tone will be applied in the direction. It's really important. So if I started to apply tone up and down this way or straight across or diagonally, I'm not going to get a three-dimensional quality. But if I begin to tone or apply my paint or whatever medium I'm working in, and I'm mindful of the surface contour, I have a greater chance of obtaining a three-dimensional object than if I just simply applied it straight up and down or side by side. So in keeping with this, now let's think about the light source. Now, one of the things that happens with the light source is that the scientific mode for light on form is 10 o'clock at 45 degrees over the left shoulder. So if I just think about a clock, and I think about this being 12 o'clock, this as being 3, 9, and 6, the light is going to be coming about here, which is somewhere between 9 and 12. All right, so if I were to put my pencil here, this is about the same, so the light would be coming in at about this angle. But now what I need to think about is that it's 45 degrees over my left shoulder. So if I think about the fact that this paper is flat and not suspended in space, 45 degrees is actually going to be off of the picture plane, which means that this pencil is going to come 45 degrees off of the paper. If I leave it flat on the paper like this, what would happen is the highlight would actually hit this edge of the egg, and I want it to sort of hit in the interior of the egg. All right, so with that said, let's think about how the light is going to hit. All right, so what I've got here is, again, here's my north, south, west, and east. And if my light is coming at 45 degrees from the left, off the picture plane, it's going to hit my egg at about this area. This here is called the direct highlight, which means that light is hitting directly in this space. The next thing that's going to happen is that the light actually isn't just hitting in one beam of light, but it actually comes behind it, and if there's a surface behind it or whatever, it will hit it and then it will bounce back up onto the egg, and that's what's known as the reflected highlight. All right, so the reflected highlight is going to be like a crescent shape. It's going to conform to the edge of the egg. Now what I've done here is I've actually shown you, let's remove this one, piece of tracing paper. Going back over the top of the egg, if my highlight is here, so let's put a big H there for highlight, the distance around here is the same, and the distance around here is the same. This is the highest point. This is actually where the light is hitting, but because of how the surface contour, we can see that the egg begins to change and go further into shadow. So what ends up happening is that this gets darker and darker and darker because it is furthest away from the highlight. Even with the surface contour drawn this way, you can see that the reflected highlight is this shape. Okay, it's opposite. Now, what I need to do is I need to start toning this egg with my pencil so that I can sort of get an idea of what it's going to look like in 3D. So I'm going to keep this here sort of as my roadmap, as a guide. And I'm going to take a piece of tracing paper and place it on the top, tape it down, and I'll very lightly draw my egg shape so that I can stay inside the lines. And using the side of my pencil, I'm going to very lightly begin to tone the egg, using the side and keeping in mind the direction of the surface contour arrows that I've created. If you find that your wrist is becoming uncomfortable, it means that you need to turn your paper. So if I want to get into this darker area here, I turned the paper, and I'm still working with my model underneath, my armature drawing underneath, and thinking about where those darks would be in relationship to where the highlight is. Now I'm going to show you something that a lot of times I see students do, and it's a real beginner mistake. But if I point it out to you, hopefully you'll see it right away, and you'll see it in your own work if you do it. I'm going to place a piece of white paper underneath so that you can see what the egg looks like from my tone. Okay, I kind of stayed away from this reflected highlight area, and I got darker as it went away from the highlight. But one of the things that you have to remember is that light advances and dark recedes. And here, the highlight looks fine, and I've begun to get into the darker, but if you look at it, it almost looks as if the reflected highlight here is brighter than the highlight itself. And that would never happen. The reason that it would never happen is that this is where light is hitting it directly, and this is where light is reflected from something and bouncing back up. So it's not a direct light source. And when you have something that's dark like this in our shadowed area, you would not have a bright highlight. The darkness here makes this reflected highlight look like it's actually brighter than this. But in actuality, they are exactly the same amount. There's nothing on here and there's nothing on here, but this looks brighter and whiter. And that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for our highlight to be in this area and the reflected light here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to slowly and carefully make this darker, so that what happens is that my reflected highlight looks like it's going to emerge and gently glow from the bottom. And as soon as I tone that down, my egg begins to look a lot more three-dimensional. You can also use your paper stump if you want and come in and blend the areas. And again, I use the side and I think about the surface contour and mold it almost as if I had a piece of clay in my hand and I was trying to form the egg. And notice how this reflected highlight is very subtle and it happens down on the edge. If you find that one side is too dark, like if this should be a little bit lighter over here, you can just simply use your kneaded eraser and you can lighten that area up so that you get a nice three-dimensional quality. I call this a quick and dirty tonal, and I like to have this on hand when I'm painting because I do turn my wrist and my hand a lot. I turn the paper, and so sometimes if I might need to place my painting upside down, I can just simply take this tonal drawing and place it upside down, and I'll always know where my light source is if I figure it out ahead of time. It may seem like it's an extra step at this point, but I think it's a time saver. So to have my light source and my surface contour clearly understood before I start is really quite an advantage for me in terms of speed and accuracy. Okay, so I'm going to take this off and we'll take the highlight armature drawing out from underneath and I'll place my egg back on top here. Now let's say, for example, that I had two colors. Let's say that this is a speckled egg. And that there were two colors on the egg. So let's say that we have color A and color B. Color A is going to be a light brown. And color B is going to be a dark brown. All right, so as we know, graphite right at this point, we're only going to do this in black and white to begin with. We know that graphite has a scale of 0%, which would be the white of the paper, to 100%. Now what we have to do is we have to figure out what would be the tonal range for color A and what would be the color range for color B. Right now, let's say that I have toned this egg here to color A. So my tonal range might be, for A, would be 0%, because my highlight is white, and let's say that it goes to about 60%, and that's where my darks and my shadows would be. And that color B isn't going to be white, because it's much, much darker. So I'm going to go from 30% to, let's say, maybe 90% because it's dark brown and the spots are almost black. All right? So now that I have a nice tonal range for the major body, my spots are dark brown. I'm now going to come in and in the dark areas where, let's say, maybe this tonal range right here might be my 60% because this is the color A, I'm going to add the darker spots on in 90%. So when I come in here, they'll be pretty dark, almost at 100%. As they begin to go towards the light, even though they're a dark brown, they're going to get a lighter range. So see here, where let's say my light brown might be only at 20 or 30%, that would mean that here in B, these would be about 40 or 50%. And in the highlighted areas where it's white, they would only hit at about 30. Watch what happens if I put a 90%. All of a sudden, it makes the egg not look three-dimensional anymore. It flattens that image. So I'm going to come in with my plastic eraser and get rid of that. And come back in here and add some of these spots at 30%, even though they are dark brown. So what your job is when you have more than one color is you need to figure out what the tonal range, let's just put this up here, tonal range is for each color. You might end up having 5 different colors in something, and you need to find out what the tonal range is. So for instance, something that's yellow is going to have a very short tonal range, maybe like 0 to 30%. And something like green might go from 0 to 60, and something that's dark blue or dark brown, as we discussed here, might start out from 30 and go to 90%. I usually don't go beyond 100% when I'm doing colors, because one of the things that I like to think about is that if I have a cast shadow, that would be the darkest part of my drawing, and that would be at the 100%. But as you see right here, I now have this egg. It's toned. It looks three-dimensional. I've added 2 colors to it so you can see the difference in the tonality. You can see my reflected highlights. And I'll put a little spot there. You can even see that there might be a spot in your reflected highlights. And so now I'm ready to go to whatever color medium I'd like. This is the end of part 1, and I hope that you understand how you can get your light source using the scientific illustration by deciding that the light is coming at 45 degrees over your left shoulder and using the armature drawing. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I look forward to hearing from you, and have a great day. Happy painting.